Jean Beaulieu cu. Comtesse Dubarry was the last maîtresse en titre of Louis XV of France and one of the victims of the Reign of Terror during the French Revolution. Early life. Jean Beaulieu cu. was born at Vaucouleurs, in the present-day Meuse department in Lorraine, France, as the illegitimate daughter of Anne Beaulieu cu. A woman of enticing beauty, whose occupation was a seamstress. Jean's father was possibly Jean-Baptiste Gourmand de Vaubernier, a friar known as Frère Ange. During her childhood, one of her mother's acquaintances, Monsieur Billiard du Monceau, and possibly father of Jean's half-brother Claude, took both Anne and 3-year-old Jean into his care when they travelled from Vaucouleurs to Paris and installed Anne as a cook in his Italian mistress household. Little Jeanette was well liked by du Monceau's mistress Francesca, who pampered her in all luxury. Du Monceau funded Jeanette's education at the Couvent de Saint-Henri. At the age of 15, Jean left the convent as she had come of age. For some reason, possibly due either to La Frédéric's jealousy of the former's beauty or because du Monceau's passion for Anne revived, both mother and daughter were thrown out. They then moved into the very small household of Anne's husband, Nicolas Rancon. Jean had to find some sort of income to help herself live, and thus travelled the dingy streets of Paris carrying a box full of trinkets for sale. Over time she worked at different occupations. She was first offered a post as assistant to a young hairdresser named Lemetz. Jean had a brief relationship with him that may have produced a daughter, although it is highly improbable. On the instigation of a Gamard, Jean was then employed as a companion to an elderly widow, Madame de la Garde, but was sent away when her youth and beauty began to meddle in the marital affairs of both La Garde's 2 sons. Later, Jean worked as a milliner's assistant in a haberdashery shop named La Toilette, owned by Madame Labille, and run by her husband. Labille's daughter, the future famed painter Adélaïde Labille-Guiard, became a good friend of Jean. As reflected in art from the time, Jean was a remarkably attractive blonde woman with thick golden ringlets and almond-shaped blue eyes. Her beauty came to the attention of Jean-Baptiste Dubarry, a high-class pimp procurer nicknamed Le Rouet. Dubarry owned a casino, and Jean came to his attention in 1763 when she was entertaining in Madame Quesnoy's brothel casino. She introduced herself as Jean Vaubernier. Dubarry installed her in his household and made her his mistress, giving her the appellation of Mademoiselle Longy. Dubarry helped establish Jean's career as a courtesan in the highest circles of Parisian society. This enabled her to take several aristocratic men as brief lovers or clients. Life as a courtesan and official mistress of Louis XV. As Mademoiselle Longy, Jean immediately became a sensation in Paris, building up a large aristocratic clientele. She had many lovers, from the king's ministers to his courtiers. The dashing yet old Maréchal de Richelieu became one of her recurring lovers. Because of this, Jean Dubarry saw her as a means of influence over Louis XV, who became aware of her in 1768 while she was on an errand at Versailles. The errand involved the Duc de Choiseul, Minister of Foreign Affairs, who found her rather ordinary, in contrast to what most other men thought of her. In any case, Jean could not qualify as a maîtresse en titre unless she had a title. This was solved by her marriage on 1 September 1768 to Dubarry's brother, Comte Guillaume Dubarry. The marriage ceremony included a false birth certificate created by Jean Dubarry himself, making Jean younger by 3 years and of fictitious noble descent. Jean was now installed above the king's quarters in Lebel's former rooms. She lived a lonely life, unable to be seen with the king since no formal presentation had taken place as yet. Very few, if any, of the nobility at court deigned to become acquainted with her, for none could accept the fact that a woman of the street had the audacity to mingle with those above her station and thrive in trying to become like them. Comte Dubarry constantly pestered Jean and urged her to speak of presentation with the king. Louis XV, in turn, asked her to find a proper sponsor to be able to have one. Richelieu took responsibility of doing so, and after those women approached asked too high a price to take the role, her official sponsor, Madame de Beauharnais, was found after having been granted that all her huge crippling gambling debts be paid off. On the first occasion when the presentation was to take place, de Beauharnais was panicked by fear and feigned a sprained ankle. On a second occasion, the king was badly hurt when he fell off his horse during a hunt and broke his arm. Finally, Jean was presented to the court at Versailles on the 22nd of April 1769, an occasion which was long awaited for by the gathering crowds outside the palace gates, and by the gossiping courtiers within the Hall of Mirrors. Jean was described as wearing a queenly silvery white gown brocaded with gold, bedecked in jewels sent by the king the night before, and with huge panniers at the sides. The dress had been specifically ordered by Richelieu especially for Jean. Many courtiers claimed that its like had never been seen before. Her hairdo was also noticeably spectacular, being the cause of her late arrival. Jean first befriended Claire Françoise, better known as Joan, brought from Languedoc by her brother Jean Dubarry to accompany her then friendless sister-in-law, being also a means of companionship and tutor in helping Jean let go of her peasant past and take a more court-like demeanor. Later on, she also befriended the Maréchale de Mirepoix. Other women of nobility were bribed into forming her entourage. Jean quickly accustomed herself to living in luxury, having also been given a young Bengali boy by Louis XV, Zamore, whom she dressed in elegant clothing to show him off. According to Stanley Loomis' biography, Dubarry, Jean's everyday routine began at 9 a.m., when Zamore would bring her morning cup of chocolate. Later she would be dressed in a fine gown of choice and dressed in her jewelry. Accordingly, either hairdresser Nocul for special occasions, or Berliner for everyday styles, would come to do her hair in powders and curls. She would then receive friends, dressmakers, jewelers and artists, showing off their new stock hoping she would be interested in buying something of their offers. She was indeed extravagant, but her good nature was not spoiled. When the old Comte and Comtesse de Lauzun were forcibly evicted from their chateau due to heavy debts, they were sentenced to beheading because the Comtesse had shot dead a bailiff and a police officer while resisting. To their great fortune, they were good friends with Madame de Beauharnais, who told Jean of their situation. Though warned by Richelieu of her possible failure, she asked the king to pardon him, refusing to rise from her kneeling posture if he did not accept her request. Louis XV was astounded and his heart thawed, saying, "Madam, I am delighted that the first favor you should ask of me should be an act of mercy." A second similar act happened when Jean was visited by a certain Monsieur Mandeville who asked pardon in the name of a young girl condemned to the gallows convicted of infanticide for giving birth to a stillborn and not informing the authorities. Jean wrote a letter to the Chancellor of France, who granted the pardon. Jean was a tremendous triumph. She now wore extravagant gowns of great proportions both in creation and cost, exhausting the treasury all the more. With diamonds covering her delicate neck and ears, she was now the king's maîtresse déclarée. Due to her new position at court, she made both friends and enemies. Her most bitter rival was the Duchess de Gramont, Choisille's sister, who had in vain tried her best to acquire the place of the late Marquise de Pompadour, and according to Diane Adélaïde de Mailly, Béatrix de Gramont would have disdained the Comtesse no matter what. She had since the very beginning plotted with her brother for the removal of Jean, even going to the extent of slandering her name as well as the king's on gutter pamphlets. In time Jean became acquainted with the Duc d'Aiguillon, nephew of Richelieu, who sided with her against the opposing Duc de Choiseul. As Jean's power in court grew stronger, Choiseul began feeling his was waning, and against the king's wishes after the terrible 7 Years' War incident, he decided France was capable of war again and sided with the Spanish against the British for possession of the Falkland Islands. When this plot came to light to the Dubarry clan, the mistress exposed all to the king, and on Christmas Eve of 1771, Choiseul was dismissed of his ministerial role and from court, ordered by His Majesty to exile to his Chanteloup property along with his wife and sister. Jean's golden age had finally truly arrived. She was rid of Choiseul and Gramont. Comte John Dubarry was dealt with, and her family had the benefits they deserved as relations to the mistress. Her mother, Anne, was now Marquise de Montrebet, residing in a luxurious apartment in the Couvent de Sainte Elizabeth. While Jean was part of the faction that brought down the Duc de Choiseul, she was unlike her late predecessor, Madame de Pompadour. However, the king went so far as to let her participate in state councils. A note in a modern edition of the Souvenirs of Mme. Campan recalls a pleasant anecdote. The king said to the Duc de Noailles that with Madame du Barry he had discovered new pleasures. "Sire," answered the duke, "that's because your majesty has never been in a brothel." While Jean was known for her good nature and support of artists, she grew increasingly unpopular because of the king's financial extravagance towards her. She was forever in debt despite her huge monthly income from the king at 1,300,000 livres. Relationship with Marie Antoinette. Her relationship with Marie Antoinette, who was married to the Dauphin of France, was contentious. The first meeting of the two was during a family supper at the Château of La Muette on 15 May 1770, a day before the great wedding. Jean had only been official mistress a little over a year, and many thought she would not be included in the list of guests for the occasion. It ended up being otherwise, to the disgust of most of those present. Marie Antoinette noticed Jean, who stood out from the rest of the crowd with her attractive, extravagant appearance and a high talkative voice. The Comtesse de Noailles informed Marie Antoinette that the role of that woman was to give pleasure to the king, and the innocent 14-year-old Archduchess added that she would thus be her rival at such a role. The Comte de Provence soon after divulged the true nature of such pleasure, causing instant hatred in Antoinette towards Dubarry for such immorality. This rivalry kept on for quite some time, especially since also the Dauphin supported Choiseul as the proponent of the alliance with Austria. Antoinette defied court protocol by refusing to speak to Mme. Dubarry, owing not only to her disapproval of the latter's background, but also after hearing from the Comte de Provence of Dubarry's amused reaction to a story told by the Prince de Rohan during one of her dinner parties, in which Marie Antoinette's mother, Maria Theresa, was slandered, adding therefore yet another foe to her list. Madame Dubarry furiously complained to the king, who in turn complained to the Austrian ambassador Mercy, who in turn did his best in convincing Antoinette to ease her ways. Eventually, during a ball on New Year's Day 1772, Marie Antoinette spoke somewhat indirectly to Dubarry the words, "There are many people at Versailles today," giving her the option to take or leave, for they were tossed in her direction. The diamond necklace. In 1772, the infatuated Louis XV requested that Parisian jewelers Baumer and Bassinger create an elaborate and spectacular jeweled necklace for Dubarry, one that would surpass all known others in grandeur, at an estimated cost of 2 million livres. The necklace, still not completed nor paid for when Louis XV died, would eventually trigger a scandal involving Jean de la Motte Valois, in which Queen Marie Antoinette would be wrongly accused of bribing the Cardinal de Rohan, Archbishop of Strasbourg in the Alsace, to purchase it for her, accusations which would figure prominently in the onset of the French Revolution. Death of Louis XV and exile. In time, the king started to show his age by constantly thinking of death and repentance, even missing appointments in Jean's boudoir. During a stay at the Petit Trianon with her, Louis XV felt the first symptoms of smallpox. He was brought back to the palace at night and put to bed, where his 3 daughters and Madame Dubarry stayed beside him for surveillance. On 4 May 1774, the king suggested to Madame du Barry that she leave Versailles, both to protect her from infection and so he could prepare for confession and last rites. She was relieved of her duties by Dr. Lemonnier and immediately retired to Aiguilon's estate near Rueil, as were his wishes. Following the death of Louis XV and his grandson's ascension to the throne, Marie Antoinette made sure her husband exiled Jean to the Abbey du Pont aux Dames near Moenbrie. At first she was not met warmly by the nuns, who knew that in their midst they had the 31-year-old former royal mistress. But soon enough they grew accustomed to her timid ways and opened up to her, most of all the abbess Madame de la Roche-Fontenelle. Life after Louis XV. A year after her imprisonment she was granted permission to visit the surrounding countryside on condition she returned and slept behind the abbey's walls at sundown. A month later, in June, she was given permission to leave the abbey but not to venture closer than 10 miles towards Versailles, thus cancelling out the idea of going to her beloved Château de Louveciennes. Hence she managed to purchase property belonging to the family of the wife of Madame de la Garde's younger son from back when she was a teenager. 2 years later, she moved to Louveciennes. In the following years, she had a liaison with Louis Hercule Timorin de Cossé, Duke of Brissac. She later also fell in love with Henry Seymour, whom she met when he moved with his family to the neighborhood of the chateau. In time, Seymour became fed up with his secret love affair and sent a painting to Jean with the words, "Leave me alone," written in English at the bottom, which the painter Lemoyne copied in 1796. The Duc de Brissac proved the more faithful in this ménage à trois, having kept Jean in his heart even though he knew of her affair with Seymour. During the French Revolution, Brissac was captured while visiting Paris, and was slaughtered by a mob. Late one night, Jean heard the sound of a small drunken crowd approaching the chateau, and into the opened window where she looked out someone threw a blood-stained cloth. To Jean's horror, it contained Brissac's head, at which sight she fainted. Imprisonment, trial and execution. In 1792, Madame du Barry was suspected of financially assisting émigrés who had fled the French Revolution, and in the following year she was finally arrested. When the Revolutionary Tribunal of Paris accused her of treason and condemned her to death, she vainly attempted to save herself by revealing the hiding places of the gems she had hidden. Zemmour, along with another member of du Barry's domestic staff, joined the Jacobin Club. He became a follower of the Revolutionary Grève and then an office-bearer in the Committee of Public Safety. Du Barry found out and questioned Zemmour about his connections with Grève. He was given 3 days' notice to quit her service. This Zemmour did without hesitation, and denounced his mistress to the committee. During the trial, he gave Chittagong as his birthplace. His testimony sent the Comtesse to the guillotine, along with many others. On 8 December 1793, Madame du Barry was beheaded by means of the guillotine on the Place de la Révolution. On the way to the guillotine, she collapsed in the tumbril and cried, "You are going to hurt me." Why? Terrified, she screamed for mercy and begged the indifferent crowd for help. Her last words to the executioner were, "One more moment, Mr. Executioner, I beg you." Although her French estate went to the Tribunal de Paris, the jewels she had smuggled out of France to England were sold by auction at Christie's in London in 1795. Colonel Johann Keglevich, the brother of Major General Stefan Bernhard Keglevich, took part in the Battle of Mainz in 1795 with Hessian mercenaries who were financed by the British Empire with the money from this sale.